And now on the line is Barry Grant, an addiction counsellor based in Waterford, and Barry is also the CEO of Problem Gambling Ireland. Barry, welcome to the programme.
Thanks, Darren. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, Barry, this is our third interview on Near FM. I last spoke to you about 8 months ago. I read reports on RTE, the Irish Times, the Irish Examiner, and the Journal.ie over the last couple of days, saying that there has been some real movement on the issue of problem gambling in Ireland from the side of the government. Could you fill our listeners in on exactly what is the news?
Well, the Cabinet have decided to move ahead with the establishment of a gambling regulatory authority in Ireland. And that type of thing, a gambling regulator or a gambling commission, had been proposed back in 2013 in the Gambling Control Bill, but that had been kind of languishing for the last 6 years or so. So now we're actually seeing some movement, and we had the Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, coming out and saying that it could take about 18 months, which sounds about kind of realistic, to kind of get the legislation passed and get the new regulatory authority up and running. So now we have a commitment from the government to do that. And we have a kind of a rough timeline there as well for the first time ever. So it's great news to see that movement there.
Yeah, I know there's an editorial in today's Friday's Irish Times as well about it. In our last interview, we spoke a lot about the Gambling Control Bill, hopefully being brought before the Oireachtas and brought into law. And I understand that it's still, I think it started the process of going through the Oireachtas, but is there still a need for the Gambling Control Bill to come into law, in your opinion, taking into account the news that has been announced this week?
I think that might impact the Gambling Control Bill, and they will end up with something else that does the same thing.
Okay.
So, this Gambling Regulatory Authority, which would have been part of the Gambling Control Bill, will be a major part of it. We're also going to see, because they announced that during the week as well, that they're going to amend the 1956 Gaming and Lotteries Act, which will be over kind of machine gambling, amusement arcades and casinos in Ireland, and also that they're going to amend the Totalisator Act of 1929, which covers tote betting in Ireland. Currently, well, actually since 1929, there's never been an age limit on tote betting in Ireland. So they're going to do those, I think, in the next few months, make those amendments. They're going to put an over 18s age limit on machine gambling in Ireland. It's been 16 up until now. So there's going to be some important changes in the meantime while we're waiting to see what happens with this gambling regulator.
Are there any major parts of the Gambling Control Bill that aren't being covered in the news announced this week?
Yeah, unfortunately we don't know. It remains to be seen. Like, we know what the Gambling Control Bill says. We don't know what this new legislation will bring. An important part of the Gambling Control Bill, as well as setting up a gambling regulator, is this social fund. And the social fund will provide funding for research into problem gambling, treatment, prevention and education. Now, both the Taoiseach and the Minister of State, David Stanton, said during the week that social fund is going to be part of the Gambling Regulatory Authority, and that it will be funded by a mandatory levy on the gambling industry. So that's very important, and that was a key part of the Gambling Control Bill, and I'm delighted to see that appears to still be there.
The editorial in today's Irish Times was saying that, like, all the new legislation promised by the government this week is probably not going to be enacted until after the next general election, So, but it's good that like, the Gambling Control Bill doesn't have to necessarily go ahead. Like, I think if you're saying, of all the changes announced by the government this week come into fruition, whether it's next year or the year after, the Gambling Control Bill has all those elements covered.
Yeah, I mean, the Gambling Control Bill is a very robust piece of legislation. So, I mean, there's a lot there for them to work from in terms of any new legislation that they will be putting in place. I mean, I would hope and imagine that they shouldn't have to do a huge amount of work there in drafting any new legislation. Yeah, and I suppose
Okay.
the other thing, I mean, okay, if we go into a new government before this is enacted, I mean, Fianna Fáil are supportive of gambling regulation in Ireland and had submitted their own gambling control bill, which was almost identical to the original one. So we should ideally see cross-party agreement between the two main parties, regardless of who's in government.
Okay, to move on, I understand that the FAI in Ireland have brought bad press or karma on themselves recently, haven't they?
Yeah, it's a strange one. I mean, the English FA ended their um, association with long association with lab books about 2 years ago because they felt that there was a conflict of interest between them being the governing body for soccer in the UK and having a gambling sponsor. And obviously they, as the governing body, would have to investigate things like match fixing. So during the week, the FAI announced that they were taking on the sponsor Sports Pizza, who are an online gambling operator. And that was a strange one. I mean, recently we've seen the GAA coming out and saying that they wouldn't have any betting sponsors. So for the FAI to go in that direction is disappointing.
Mm. Just to talk a bit about the UK, bearing in mind that a lot of Irish people support English football teams, and bearing in mind that approximately half of the English Premier League teams are sponsored by gambling companies, is there any big news since we've talked last on the FA in England and gambling, or in relation to the UK in general on the issue?
I don't think there's been any major changes in recent times. I mean, they have a very well established gambling regulator there. And they are looking at, I think it's this year, should be coming through what they call a whistle-to-whistle ban on advertising in football anyway, so that there would be no advertising allowed from the start to the end of a football match. So that'd be positive because, I mean, a huge amount of children watch those matches, but I suppose while there might not be Ray Winston's giant head popping up at half-time to try and flog you in match betting, you're going to have, roughly half of the teams wearing shirts that are sponsored by gambling companies. You might have gambling ads going up in the hoardings in the background. Every shirt worn by every player in every league in football in the UK has a Sky Bet logo on it because they have a kind of a gambling education scheme going on with all the players in the league. So it may be difficult to completely avoid seeing sponsorship or advertising, but it is a move in the right direction to have a ban during matches that children might see.
Yeah, okay, Barry, just come towards the end of our interview. Big question. What else, in your view, should happen in Ireland when it comes to the government and also to non-governmental organisations in relation to trying to stop the issue of problem gambling?
Well, I think the government could definitely look at advertising. That is a huge one. I mean, we have young people and vulnerable people being inundated with ads. The ones that we're most conscious of will be on TV and radio, but actually a huge portion of the spend is online, which is kind of much more difficult to regulate. But certainly looking at that and looking at the culture around it, I mean, we need the government to come out and do something from a public health perspective in the way that they do with alcohol and cigarettes, where they put some money into public health advertising to say, yeah, gambling can be an enjoyable activity for a lot of people, for the majority of people, but some people will become addicted to gambling, and these are the warning signs, these are the things to watch out for. We've never had that in Ireland. We've never had that kind of public health approach to gambling and gambling addiction in Ireland. I think a lot of the NGOs are already doing a great job. We have so many addiction treatment centres around the country and the likes of Gamblers Anonymous as well, who are doing amazing work on the ground and, filling in the gaps for the state as NGOs so often do. But I think the government really need to kind of step up and start getting a handle on the situation.
Yeah.